So today we're going to just discuss some of the latest happenings from the calciomercato. Today I am joined by Matthew Santangelo and Roberto Grosso. I am Alex Mascitti, as always. Today was kind of a lull in the latest happenings from around Italy and more so in the Mercato. Um, a big thing right now is teams are just beginning to get back into the groove training. I think Roma began their training yesterday or today for the weekend fixtures. But more so, there were a few moves that went official today. Um, Mauricio Pinilla went to Genoa from Atalanta. That's about the biggest one that went official so far. But the first 2 days of the window, we saw some moves that had already been pre-planned, such as Tomas Rincon going to Juventus. Um, I mean, that's just standard issue, I think. I mean, Roberto Gagliardini looks like he's heading to Inter. That's not official yet, but I'm going to bring you in now, Matt. 30 million for a 22-year-old who's played less than 20 Serie A games. That's just a tremendous amount of money.
I mean, it's interesting because when you look at that three in front of the zero, now you kind of get into the discussion of a Kondogbia type situation where there's a lot of pressure behind it. It's not like it's Inter spending 10 to 12 million on a guy and paying for his future potential. They're paying for Gagliardini to step in and be a major contributor to Inter getting back in the Champions League race. So, listen, for me, from what I've seen from Gagliardini, seems like a very promising player. Of course, if you guys haven't been following the Azzurri, Ventura called him up a couple months ago. So obviously Ventura sees something in him as well. I think, honestly, if you're an Inter fan, I think you got to be quite pleased with this addition, just for the simple fact is that, one, he is an Italian. Two, he does have Serie A experience. Three, he's 22. And, of course, four, he has upside to grow. So, even if there are a little bit of a couple of obstacles and struggles in his growth that we see from the jump, at least you kind of have this idea that, okay, well, we're also paying for his future potential, what he could be down the road, which is, maybe for some people, a potential starter for the Azzurri. So I think it's a steep feat to pay, no doubt. But as I mentioned with most big money deals, any type of player with this type of tag, if they live up to the tag and they play well, all is forgotten. The fee kind of goes by the wayside, and everyone goes on accordingly. So I think it's something that Inter need to be optimistic about, especially the fan base.
Roberto, too much or too little?
Well, we can't forget that this is actually Gagliardini's first year in Serie A. He's only played about 13 games, $30 million for a player that we only seen for, I'd say, the first half of the season in Serie A. I do believe it is a hefty price, and I really can't blame Atalanta for putting a price tag on such a player. Because of the fact that they know that there's going to be a lot of suitors and they're going to bank a huge fee from it. Gagliardini is still a good passer of the ball, got good midfield vision, able to control the play a bit, works well in the formation that Atalanta has going, and has been flourishing under Gasperini. But again,
go ahead.
Again, the only thing is, prior to that, it was mostly loans out in Serie B. He had part of the season last year playing in Vicenza. He spent time at Spezia, spent time at Cesena. And listen, I think it's more of a long-term investment. If the idea is that Gagliardini is going to come into the midfield and is going to be that key piece of the puzzle that's going to boost Inter into a Champions League spot, I think we might be thinking a bit too far ahead. But long-term investment, more or less, I do still think $30 million is a huge fee. But then again, that's modern day football, right? The fees are high for players. You base it on, a couple of months of performance, and suddenly you're opening up the wallet. So we'll have to see. I mean, we could easily mention right now that, it's a huge fee and it might not work out. But then again, he could end up being an explosive player for them in the long run and contribute right away. So we'll have to wait and see.
My thing with Atalanta is, it's pretty much an auction. It's like an open shooting range for top European clubs. You look at this side throughout the first half of the season, and we're talking them bagging over 80 million euro in transfer fees just off 3 players. The one player we haven't talked about yet is Frank Kessie. Now, how much of his, his ability is just based on hype, that remains to be seen. He's a young player. He's a teenager, which, by the way, Gagliardini is not a baby per se. He's almost 23 now, but I digress. Frank Kessie's a different story. He can go for upwards of probably 30 million euro, the same as Gagliardini. But for Atalanta, there's also one more. Actually, to be honest, there's several more. You have Mattia Caldara, who's, for all intents and purposes, has signed with Juventus. Today, his agent told Sky Sports that he was pretty much at Juventus' will. We heard the same thing from Giuseppe Morata, the sporting director of Juventus, saying, we'll decide when we take him. It's almost like an open range. There's everybody's for sale. They're a club, let's be honest. If they bag 80 million euro in January, that's a tremendous feat. That's almost like a Scudetto dei Soldi. That's a ton of money that they're going to win, just from selling 3 players. But there's another team out there who's caught my attention rather, in January, and that's Genoa. They're almost following the same trajectory, albeit much lower in the table. But they're already in talks now. They've already sold Leonardo Pavoletti to Napoli. They've already sold Tomas Rincon, who was he was the midfield engine, and now he's gone. There's also players for Genoa who could be leaving, such as
Diego Laxalt.
Yes. I mean, we're talking about major players also heading out the door. But for Genoa, who is the bigger loss? Is it Pavoletti or is it Rincon? I'll start with you, Matt.
You know what? I think I'm going to say Pavoletti because, we saw what he did last year, or rather, when 2016 began up until the end of the season. He was a little bit right there with Belotti in terms of form. And, some people were actually, making the case that he should have been called to the Azzurri given his form and given the lack of options that, of course, Conte had. I honestly, for Napoli, it's a fantastic move. I think it's a little bit high, but it's a matter of supply and demand. They're of course in the Champions League round of 16. They're competing with Real Madrid, and of course now they still want to be able to secure a Champions League spot for next year. So I understand what they're doing. Having said that, I think Pavoletti is going to be a little bit bigger of a loss to their team, but in terms of the physicality in the midfield, I think Rincon is going to be certainly missed, just given the fact that he is, like you just mentioned, like an enforcer type and someone has that veteran presence to kind of be a calming presence for everyone else.
Roberto, where do you see Genoa finishing the season with these pretty key strategic losses to the roster?
Well, before heading to that, I just want to add on to what Matt was saying about Pavoletti being most likely one of the bigger losses out of the two. And the thing is that thankfully, I would believe that Genoa have already, prepared themselves for that long term by having brought in Giovanni Simeone. At this point now, the contribution has been great upon the player. 6 goals in 16 games. But in terms of losing someone like Pavoletti who had fantastic form, it is a loss, and of course it's a win also for Napoli. But at the same time, for Napoli, you gain Pavoletti and you possibly lose, depending on how things are going to go in the market, possibly lose Manolo Gabbiadini, because at some point there's only going to be space really for one of them, because Milik's form is just ridiculous. So I still think that Genoa is going to finish most likely mid-table range. I think we can forget about them competing for a Europa League spot going deep into the season. But they did smart by focusing long-term by, bringing someone like Giovanni Simeone to cover for Pavoletti.
But what's smart about what Genoa did is the fact they've kind of capitalized on, several of their contemporaries' needs. And so you saw with Juventus, they needed a midfielder. They came to Genoa for Rincon. Napoli needed a striker. They spent 20 million, if I'm correct on the figure, for Pavoletti. So they have to, to your point, when you talked about Atalanta, they're capitalizing on the market. They're capitalizing on the urgency of other clubs to reach their goals. So I understand it from that position. But, when you bring in a guy like Pinilla, and then, we're hearing that they're close with Tarabt, these seem like moves that, they're kind of weathering the storm. They're kind of being content with finishing the table. And they did some of these similar moves last year when they brought in Suso on loan from Milan. He thrived, of course. And then when they brought Suso in at the time, they were, kind of relegation waters, and they were able to fight back and see it off and actually finish mid-table. So I think that's what Genoa was kind of understanding here. They're kind of capitalizing on the market itself and the urgency of others to fill needs, which is smart.
I think what is going to affect Genoa long term, especially with the rumors that are out that Mattia Perin, there's a possibility of him maybe leaving in the summer, especially for a keeper of his caliber. At some point, is going to want to play European football on a consistent basis, with the possibility of Napoli and Fiorentina being the two main clubs that are on his trail. The summer is going to really be big in that sense, in that department for Genoa. And it's going to be really hard to replace Mattia Perin if he does leave. But then again, it wouldn't surprise me as much. And if he does leave, in all honesty, if there's anyone that would need a goalkeeper more, I think, of course, to replace Reina, Perin would be an absolute. But also Fiorentina, because for me, the verdict's out pretty much on Tatarusanu. And I believe that if Fiorentina truly want to fight for a spot in Europe, someone like Mattia Perin will be the keeper that'll help them win games and steal points.
I don't think Fiorentina is going to be in Europe next year. I'm going to say that now. I really don't think that Fiorentina is going to be.
They don't spend enough. It's just
no, and it's the same thing. And Paulo Sousa's continuously. He's also what I'm talking about. Sousa. I'm pretty sure that he's going to be gone by July. But anyways, Fiorentina doesn't spend. Their team is full. It's like a Frankenstein mixture of just several young players who come from all over the world, and there doesn't seem to be a project. Other clubs like Atalanta, Sassuolo, Juventus, Milan, there's a definite project. Fiorentina don't have that.
It's like a year by year.
They're in ninth place.
It's like a year by year basis with them. They're kind of going. They're kind of just. Staying the course, and you're saying, fourth, fifth, we'll hover around there. We make a move here and there, maybe we can fight, but they don't look like there's an urgency for them to make that leap, like we've seen with Roma and Napoli over the recent years, where they've added substantial pieces to the program to really make that push and to actually battle with Juventus for the Scudetto, which is kind of what we're seeing here. That Juventus is beatable this year, of course.
I agree. I think that's a very fair statement. I think Juventus, after these so many years, of course, cracks are beginning to be shown in Serie A. I think they know that they have bigger fish to fry in Europe. But, I look at Juventus, just taking Fiorentina, for example, a club that has no direction at the moment. And I've already listed, 4 clubs who I think have clear plans. I think Inter and Milan are beginning to actually show signs of recovering, especially Milan. Inter, if they finish in the top 5, I would consider this year a success. But by those margins, and when you include Atalanta, there's just nowhere for Fiorentina to fit into the puzzle for me.
Now you got Torino now too. Torino's making a hike.
Exactly. Yes, Torino's a big. I mean, they're loaded with prospects. You can name. That's another team, by the way. I think next year. When Torino goes to collect on some of these players, they'll probably make more than Atalanta will. They've got major talents as well. But I'm going to shift over. We're going to talk a little bit about Napoli for our southern fan base. Now, let's be clear about one thing with them. When they had Arek Milik before he tore his ACL, that was a ferocious side. Without a striker, I mean, I'm not even. You can't even say Gabbiadini's a striker.
No,
I mean, he's more of a central forward, more of a playmaking forward. But if they do sell Gabbiadini, they have Pavoletti and Milik, who are, they're just poachers. That's what they do. Can Napoli fight for the Scudetto, or do they need something more in January to really boost the team?
You know what? I don't see where else they're gonna add. I just don't. They're not gonna add strikers, wingers if they're stacked. Midfielders, they have so much talent, young talent, and of course they have Marek Hamšík kind of anchoring the youth. But I guess maybe in the defense, I'm not too sure. I think maybe a couple moves here and there, but nothing major, because
no new starter.
No new starter, because they got guys like Diawara, you got guys like Alan, Jorginho, Hamšík. Raj, who we haven't seen much of. Now you move up the pitch to on their day. Honestly, they're one of the the most exciting attacks to watch. Yeah, Mertens, Callejon.
They scored the most up until the Christmas break in Serie A.
Exactly, and it's I just that's why I think they splashed the cash on Pavoletti, because I think they kind of see that they really see an opening here to kind of maybe jump into second and then possibly even contend with Juventus for first by adding Pavoletti, because I think when you get to the second half of the season, every point becomes that much more important, especially when you add the Coppa Italia fixtures and you need the depth. When you add the round of 16 versus Real Madrid. So I can understand the urgency to add Pavoletti, albeit at a high price. I kind of see them standing pat, maybe exploring a couple options, maybe than the defense, but nothing crazy. If anything, they may sell someone, but I mean, I don't see much more from them, to be honest.
Roberto, listen to this list and comment on it for me. There are currently, by our mark, 4 players that Napoli are interested in.
Okay.
You got Andrea Conti, the right back for Atalanta. You have Amato Cicciaretti, who plays for Benevento in Serie B. Riccardo Orsolini, who we'll talk about more later, but he plays for Ascoli in Serie B. And Leandrinho, who plays for the Brazilian Serie A with Ponte Preta. Now, given those possible 4 names, those 4 players that they're interested in, is Napoli – are they building for the long haul here? I mean, let's not forget they have Real Madrid in just, by my count, 4 or 5 weeks?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some – I mean, it doesn't seem like these players that they're linked with are going to give them the salto di qualità for the Scudetto, but it does seem like they will be a force to be reckoned with in the future. What are those names? What sticks out to you about them?
Well, I think right away, if we're going to look at someone like Conte from Atalanta as a right back, if you bring a player like him, excuse me, if you bring a player like him in, again, you're looking at the future there, because there is absolutely no way that he would displace Hisage in his right back role. Because Hisage at the moment is, if not the best right back in Serie A, already for me top 5 right backs in all of Europe. An exceptional player with great defensive awareness. Right there, there is no one that's going to displace him. Bring in someone like Orsolini again. You have to take into account, and I know we said we're going to talk about him later, but is he a player that can add a bit of flair and could be that off the bench player to make a difference, maybe in the late game? Maybe as a possibility, but we have to take into account too that Orsolini has been playing against Serie B defenders now, and we've seen it many times over. Players that are excelling in the second division, despite the fact that I think 100% that Serie B is a very competitive second division league, where again the quality defensively is not as strong as when you're moving up into the top flight. And I'm sure it works out in any other second to first division, out in any other of the top leagues in Europe. But for Orsolini, for a player that has good close control, great on 1v1, loves to cut in from the right to the left, could be a potential piece that could be added as maybe a late game sub. But again, not someone who's going to make an impact right away. And it's best that he stays at Ascoli for the season. And I personally, I don't know if that's going to be a fit, especially with the wingers that they have.
Right.
No, I don't see any of those 4 players being what Napoli will really need to get a boost into the Scudetto race, or even help them in terms of going deep into the CL. For me, one of the best acquisitions they ever made was in the summer by bringing in Diawara. I know that they had Jorginho right there at the base, but to bring in one of the best press resistant midfielders in all of Serie A, someone who is a destroyer in the midfield, but also can contribute by building up the play right there. And also having someone like Jorginho available on the bench, it's
a midfield most teams would love to have, especially the team that.
But that's it. It's an embarrassment of riches for Sarri, but it's also it's a good headache to have for him, because that's where he can utilize either or players, especially when they're going to go play against Real Madrid in the Champions League. And for me, if you're asking me, I know I'm drifting off topic, but you need to start Diawara in there.
I think Diawara is a big prospect. I'm very interested to see how he continues to develop. There's one thing going from performing well for a Serie A club on a bit role basis, but it's another thing to be, a world beater in Europe. There's 2 different levels there, and it's yet to be seen if Diawara can make the jump. Now, I want to quickly shift over now to Roma. And Roma's really, they're not on the market for, it seems, for anybody big in January. Of course, you have Jesse from PSG, but as I noted earlier in my interview with Lorenzo Pellegrini's agent, it doesn't seem like he's coming to Roma in January. So if you're a Roma fan, do you expect anybody to, a big signing, a new starter to arrive in January? Or do you just don't? Is there a need for a new player who can fit into the starting 11 right now, Matt?
I mean, I can see where I mean, a lot of the winger links are coming from. Of course, they seem to be in a lock with Milan for Deulofeu from Everton. So I mean, I think part of the thing is with them is that I think you got Dzeko, who's performing extremely well this year. Not many people expected that, including myself. I think the only area that they would possibly add would be on the wings. Maybe as a depth type of move. El Shaarawy hasn't played as much this year. Salah's been fantastic, and I think that's kind of obvious for anyone who's watching them. I'm not too sure. I mean, Jesse, I just don't see where. I think he'll probably go on a loan spell, maybe with Las Palmas, his hometown club. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Roma's going to do. It's going to be interesting to see, what Spalletti gets from, the couple games coming up. Maybe he'll use that as a barometer to see whether he needs to add in certain areas or deduct from certain areas. So I guess we'll have to see, what Roma looks like after a game or two after the break.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to the same thing in terms of wing play. Them being in the race with Milan for Deulofeu, but also maybe for Keita Balde, who is most likely on the exit at Lazio. But again, I think that would be the only aspect of where they would truly add at that moment. And like you were saying, Matt, it's going to take the next game or two to see from Spalletti what his needs are going to be going forward.
Last topic we're going to discuss for our show tonight is Juventus. We've kind of skirted around it tonight, but there's a lot of going on, at least behind the scenes, for the Bianconeri. Now, it's not a secret that this team, Juventus, is I think, by all margins, maybe the best team in Serie A and a top 4 team in Europe. Now, from what everything is lining up, or how everything is lining up in January, it doesn't appear that they're going to be going after a big signing. However, they're going after smaller players and younger players who could potentially join in the summer. So there's 2 that stick out in my mind, actually 3. You have Rodrigo Bentancur from Boca Juniors. You have Mattia Cadara from Atalanta. But then you have Riccardo Orsolini from Ascoli. Now, Orsolini's been linked to half of the teams in Serie A. It's not a secret that Juventus wants to keep the base of their team Italian. But should Juventus, instead of going after the smaller, more prospect players, it seems like they're in an arms race with Roma over who can, buy up the most youth. Should they go for the big signing, the Higuain, the midfield, it seems, Marco Verratti, instead of going after smaller players? Now, PSG, of course, in the Champions League, Verratti's cup tied. But should the future of the Juventus midfield be in the hands of Italy's brightest talent at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what most people expect, especially, since, we know Verratti signed a contract extension, but I think it's obvious that, he's kind of unsettled at PSG. I mean, of course, that's not a move they're going to be able to make now, in my opinion. I just think that's too difficult, especially with the fee and everything like that. But to your earlier point about Orsolini, for them, I don't think it's an issue to keep adding young Italians to the core of the team. They're doing it in the back. I mean, you got Rugani now. Of course, Cadara seems to be on his way there as well, and then you have Romagnaglia, if I said it correctly, who's also a bright prospect. So they pretty much have the future trio of center backs lined up already. which is a luxury to have already, for a team like Juventus when you have that good of a trio as it is with Bonucci, Chiellini, and Barzagli. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see with Juventus. I think most people want them, especially their fan base, wants them to add that difference maker in the midfield because it seems like they're lacking it once they lost Pogba. And of course, Witzel is choosing China for an obscene amount of money. But I don't know. I don't know if that target's out there for Juventus because I think, most people think that the guy for them going forward is Verratti. I think that's the guy that most people expect to be in a Bianconero. So I don't know. I think, maybe Rincon's one of the moves they make. I think they maybe get a couple of stopgap options to kind of see how far they can get in Europe. And then, of course, maybe see off the Scudetto. And then in the summer, re-examine everything with their midfield. But, of course,
they need a fourth striker?
You're getting Piazza back. You have Higuain, you have Mandzukic, who's played well. You have Dybala, who's returning from injury. I think a lot of the issues that they have can be solved by just getting healthy. We haven't seen much of Piazza, and Piazza is an exciting prospect for them. I think once you see Juventus get everyone back healthy and everyone's clicking, I mean, we haven't seen the best of Pjanic either. So I think, part of it's getting guys healthy and getting the active guys in the form that they're capable of. In order for Juventus to succeed, I think that's the biggest thing for them, at least until the summer.
Roberto, you get the final word.
Yeah, I think it becomes extremely difficult to start adding players, in the likes of Marco Verratti in January. Again, forget about the fees, forget about availabilities, but more also the sense of of an aspect of being cup tied. That you want to make a deep run in the Champions League, especially for a club like Juventus, where the objective is to win it. I mean, it's not just going to the finals, it's not just making a semi-final appearance, it's to win it. And to sign a player like Verratti, but then being unable to use him at all throughout the run in the Champions League, if the Scudetto was pretty much locked up at that point, what is it going to do? Of course, yes, you have him for the following year, but you can't use him in the most important part of the season. So again, bring in someone like Rincon. It is going to help shore up a bit of the midfield. You're going to have a player like that who's going to be breaking up plays, going to be making the key tackles, and more or less protect Pjanic while Pjanic moves forward and starts building up play and releasing the balls out in the final third. So following even what Matt was saying, defensively they're fine for the future. Mattia Caldera lined up. I don't think they're going to be. I think he's going to be on loan still at Atlanta up until 2018, if I'm correct. Rugani.
That's what I've heard too.
Sorry?
That's what I've heard too, is that they're going to leave him on loan for the next season as well.
Well, that's it. Let him get the proper playing time because he's going to come in and he's going to sit the bench and there's no point there. Let him get the time in the starting 11 at Atalanta, and especially if it happens that Gasperini gets them into at least the Europa League, then that's an extra bit of European experience under his belt. Rugani coming through the system, doing a fantastic job despite the injuries, that were to Barzagli, to Chiellini, and Bonucci, and taking over the leadership role at the back. Plus, again, like Matt was saying, Filippo Romagna, who is currently on loan at Novara, potential long-term captain, as they say, for Juventus, but that's up to be seen. Again, I don't see a big signing happening. It's a shame that Witzel decided to choose China, but hard to really compete at that point in terms of the finances that are being thrown out to him for the salary. It would have been great to have him in that midfield as that possible, Pogba style player people were maybe looking for to have. But again, if the transfer itself hadn't been mishandled in the summer, he would have probably been a Bianconero at this point. Talks even now of maybe someone like Schneiderlin or Luis Gustavo in the defensive midfield role coming in. But, it's up to be seen. I think now it's get players back healthy, stick with what you have, stopgap motions again, like someone like Rincon to come in and help on the defensive end of the game, then less on the, let's say, the build-up play. I think they're going to be fine, but let's not look at or get our hopes up that Verratti is going to be coming here in January. It's going to be more something of a summer move.
Yeah, I don't see any Juventus panic buys in January.
It would be uncharacteristic for him, and that's actually that can be said for most of the big teams in Italy. Is that there really is there's not many big players coming to Italy. I think in January, I'd be very, very surprised. Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed our podcast. We, in fact, ran a little bit longer, but you know how it is when a bunch of Italians start talking about Serie A. Hope you guys have a great evening and stay warm out there.
Ciao, guys.
Take care, guys.